Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Justin. I work for the Irresistible Church Network here in Atlanta. And today I get to have an interview with one of the amazingly gifted and talented lead pastors in that network, Matt Johnson, pastor of Journey Church in Murray, Kentucky. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for being a part of this today.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Great to be with you. And Justin, thanks for the opportunity.
So today, real quick, a framework of what we're going to be talking about in general. Anytime we host these webinars, what we do is we're talking about a subject that is a mixture of principles and practices and preferences. And principles are those things that are transcendent for all churches, that at some level, every effective church needs to be thinking about whatever this thing is we're talking about. We'll talk about more of that in just a moment. But then, of course, there's practices and there's preferences. And those things are influenced by, the expression of that ministry in your local context, the leader's gifting, all of those different things factor in how you express this. So what you're going to see today is something that both exists at a level of every church probably needs to be thinking about this, certainly needs to be thinking about this in my experience, but how it's executed is really going to be dependent on you as a leader and your local context and the needs of your local community. So one of the things that's going to happen is Matt and I are going to be pretty efficient. We're going to kind of go through this because we want to get to Q&A and make sure we're answering the questions you have specifically about this. And so we're going to move pretty quickly, but along the way, you're going to have questions. And as you do us a favor and put those in the chat. In fact, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. Louis kind of monitoring the chat. And what he's going to start to do is make a list of questions. And when we get to the questions in just a few minutes or in a little bit, he'll start to send those to us so we can ask them. So as we go, if we miss something you wanted us to talk about, go ahead and throw your question in there. So I joined North Point 10 years in. So North Point was blowing and going by the time I got here. And I came from a church, actually a very, very different model of church than what North Point was doing. And so I grew up in a different kind of church. I worked at a different kind of church prior to coming here. So I was really interested when I came to North Point. Why is this place, doing what it's doing? Why is it so successful? And so I was kind of an outsider observing it like many other leaders. And, obviously God's grace and favor, biggest part of all of that, right? But when you kind of boil down beneath all of that, what was going on? You had world-class communication, no doubt, very difficult to copy, unless you're gifted that way. But really the secret sauce that I observed was it had something that I hadn't really seen in any of the churches I'd grown up in or had led in, which was a fully integrated strategy. I mean, every step was thought about from the time you pulled in the parking lot to the time you got into a small group and were part of the spiritual formation strategy. And on top of that, they created all of this super clear language. And I really feel like after working here for years and years, that really is the secret, that there was a fully integrated strategy, top to bottom, very transportable, easy to know language that staff knew and that volunteers knew. And so what we're going to talk about today, if you think about, Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The Advantage, and he sort of handed off, hey, all the organizations I've seen, including faith-based organizations, could all benefit from clarity at 6 levels. And I will tell you, working with churches and being in churches, as many of you here, there are so many of the problems we experience in church that would be solved by clarity in these 6 levels. So much of what we experience could be traced back to a lack of clarity. Today, the levels we're going to be talking about and the questions that go along with these levels are really in that plan and strategy level. What is it that we do and how will we succeed? And Matt's going to talk us through a lot of how to do that and how their church at Journey is doing that. But one of the cool things is that just like me, Matt's another church leader who came and visited North Point and saw something that he could take back to his church. I wish when I came to work here, I could have helped my previous church and brought this back to them, but Matt saw this. So Matt, give us a little bit of background at Journey and kind of how you interacted with sort of the strategy of North Point back in those days.
Yeah, Justin. So I'm a 3rd generation pastor and grew up in a very different model of ministry as well. So in 2005, there were 7 of us who started a church in Murray, Kentucky on the campus of Murray State University. We had no clue what we were doing, but we spent a lot of time leading up to that researching. And I believe it was 2000, I was at North Point for the very first Catalyst conference. Andy did a talk on Foyer living room kitchen, and I knew we needed a strategy, and that strategy made perfect sense. So from the beginning, when we started Journey, we began implementing Foyer living room kitchen. Now, we were very novice and rudimentary because we had no clue what we were doing. And to be honest, we didn't understand all of the strategy at that point for sure. But over the years, as we've grown in understanding it, it definitely has made a big impact in terms of helping people grow spiritually and building a healthy church.
What did you, so you're a strategic thinker, like I know you and you have a strategic mind, like you would have found a strategy for Journey. What was it about this specific strategy that appealed to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm forever grateful to Andy and the whole NPM team for coming up with this. It resonated with me for a few reasons. One, it's extremely intentional. So the strategy moved people in a specific direction towards a clearly defined destination or outcome, which was new and different from the church background I grew up in. It was simple. So it's built around easy, obvious strategic steps, and it's not program driven. Now, the reason I gravitated towards that, Justin, is one, this strategy maximizes resources, both money and manpower, which means it can be implemented in any size church versus some of the program driven approaches I'd seen over the years that took a whole lot of resources. Third, it was intuitive. It's really clear, is really easy to understand. Everybody's had the experience. When you start talking about Foyer, living room, kitchen, everybody immediately goes, "Oh yeah, I've had." They've done that with people who come to their home,
Right.
and it's portable. It is so easy to remember because it is familiar. So that's why it resonated with me. It made perfect sense, and it was all interconnected and worked together. But even people who aren't strategic thinkers, Justin, I mean, it's a playbook that's really easy to follow. And so I've seen
Yeah.
it implemented by leaders who are wired in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Like a couple of things you said that there, I would brought me back in memory. Like, sometimes there's a lot of strategies that are, really something that people who are wired to love strategy resonate with. And one of the things I thought was very sticky about this one was the relational nature of it, that you didn't have to love strategy. You're talking about how do we take somebody from a stranger to a family member? Everybody could resonate with that. Volunteers could grab onto that. And you didn't have to love strategy to go, yeah, I want everybody who's a stranger to be a family member when it comes to church. And so I felt like you were saying that was both intuitive and something that anyone could resonate with, no matter who they were. Now, what I love about our network, I really love about our network, is that it isn't about just cookie cutter copying and pasting something North Point did. It's about leaders like yourself who got an idea, but also saw ways that idea needed to evolve, needed to grow, and needed to change. And so now what we're going to talk about is how you took the seed of that idea and have built something, in my mind, that is amazing out of it. But before we talk about the specifics of how you evolved this model, talk a little bit about something you kind of share. Like, I know people approach you all the time to kind of talk about how you guys do this, but there's something you kind of talked to me about, hang on, before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of strategy, there's an idea we all have to embrace about what is God's part and what is our part in ministry. Talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really important to clarify that. So the way I describe it is God's role is to convict and change lives, which makes what we're doing challenging because we're all trying to inspire people to follow Jesus. But the reality is we have no power over whether they actually do that or not. That's an internal heart thing that happens, right? So,
Right.
so we've tried to be really clear on what our part is. And we say that our role is to clear the path and point the way. So it's to remove every unnecessary obstacle that might get in the way, confuse somebody, trip them up before they got to Jesus. And so the way I often describe it, the metaphor I use is it's like a sailboat. So we can raise the sails, we can have the boat in the water, we can do everything we want to do, but unless the wind blows, you're not going anywhere. Well, this
Mhm.
strategy is our sailboat. This strategy is how we raise the sails, do everything we
Mhm.
can to put ourselves in a position uh, to see God move. But then He has to bring the wind in order to change lives. So I think separating that takes a little pressure off of us, but it also acknowledges, hey, we're not brilliant, and there's not a strategy that's going to create the outcomes we want apart from God's help.
So talk about, you kind of also mentioned in there kind of the importance of creating those environments that remove those obstacles. What is it specifically about that's key about those environments to you, like that makes a good environment that fits that larger idea of, hey, how do we remove these things that could get in the way of God working?
Yeah, that is a great question. And you know what? That somewhat, Justin, changes over time because people change. But what we're always looking at is how do we create an environment that has a clear purpose and a clear win? So we're not going to try to do too many things in one environment. We're going to be very clear on who it's for, on what we're trying to accomplish, because if we get clear on that, it's going to be clear to the people who are trying to engage in those environments as well.
Okay, so that's a great segue actually to where we're headed, because you were running the Foyer living room kitchen playbook and something started happening where you noticed there were pieces, whether because of changes happening in our culture or other things that you knew, hey, this model isn't fully capturing what I want strategically our leaders to understand and embrace. Talk us through the catalyst behind what was it that began to cause you to desire to evolve what you had already learned, and then where you are landed on the new model for you.
Yeah, okay. So there are two pieces of this. When we get into this, we'll talk about some easy, obvious strategic steps. Well, people's preferences change over time, which means you have to modify or change those steps because they just outdate themselves. And that's fine. North Point, Andy, everybody's been doing that for years. I think the thing that was different, though, that we noticed, and this was back 2015, 2016, we began to notice that people's perception and perspective of the church was changing, which meant their actions and attitude towards the church changed. So, for instance, we could no longer expect people to be positive about church when somebody brought it up. We couldn't expect them just to come and check us out. I mean, 20 years ago, you could still expect people to walk in the door to check it out. You could wait and meet them when they walked in your building.
Right.
We realized that was not the case anymore. We couldn't assume that they trusted us or they even want us in the community. So because we knew, okay, they're not just going to walk in and we can meet them in the building, we had to come up with a strategy to meet them on their turf, and then to build enough trust that they would show up to a service on a Sunday eventually. So we changed two fundamental things about Foyer, living room, and kitchen. The first thing we did is we added an environment. We'll talk about that in just a second, because of the fact that we knew we had to meet them on their turf. The second thing we did was we moved this strategy from linear to circular. So North Point always presented in a linear fashion, which was fine. But what we noticed was internally, people had the idea that once they got in a group, that they had checked all the boxes and they were done. And we were trying to communicate, no. God's put you where you are for a reason. And you're there to help guide other people into a growing relationship with Jesus. So we made this circular. And so there are four different environments. If you want me to, I'll just talk through all four of these 30,000 foot level. Okay, so the environment that we added is right there at the top. It was a neighborhood environment. So then the thought behind it is simply this. Instead of expecting people to come to our front door and ring the doorbell now, we got to get out and walk the neighborhood and meet people in their front yards and build a relationship there before they're ever comfortable coming over to our house. So the neighborhood environment is designed to change the way people view church. Hopefully all churches, but at least our church, if nothing else. And we do that primarily through different community events that we hold through different ways, no strings attached generosity with our money and our time in terms of how we invest in the community. We can talk more about that later, but that's what the neighborhood environment is designed to do. I'm going to meet you on your turf, and I'm going to serve you and love you in such a way that it changes the way you think about church. And then the Foyer environment is designed with the guest in mind. So these are our Sunday morning service. We have these at every level, right? So for adults, for kids, for students, we have Foyer environments where they're larger gatherings, just like our service. And we know there are going to be guests in the room. We assume people who are not followers of Jesus are in the rooms in those environments. So it doesn't change the fact that we're not going to talk about certain truths necessarily, but it changes how we talk about it. Just like when somebody comes over to our house and we gather our kids together before they get there, Justin, we're like, hey, there's some things you can't do while the guests are here, and please don't bring these things up, right? That's family business.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so it's the same thing. And then we have living room environments, which are designed to develop friendships. So these are medium-sized gatherings or environments where people can start getting to know each other better. The best example for us, we consider all of our ministry teams, our volunteer teams, to be living room environments.
Yeah.
So absolutely they're serving, making a difference. But what's really happening is they're building relationships and a network of support within our church. And then the final environment is the kitchen environment. And Andy, the way they always taught it was it's designed to help you grow as a family. We say it's designed to help you develop deeper relationships. And the best example of this are small groups, which everybody's familiar with. This is where people sit around a kitchen table, do life together, get to know each other in a smaller, more intimate setting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things you said definitely resonate with my experience. I'm sure probably many of the leaders listening to this are, I mean, you and I are in the Southeast, and we've seen the temperature change towards the default setting on what church was. I mean, I know my neighbors now, are far more skeptical than they were, but they are excited whenever they see us doing something in the community. That actually matters to them. So my experience definitely resonates. The other thing you said that I thought is kind of a nuance, but it's something I've found is important, is when churches add an intentional layer of ministry to that volunteer opportunity. That, as people are serving, they're actually forming kind of a pseudo church in that volunteer capacity. And when I've seen teams really begin to leverage ministry in there, it really has been neat to see the way that deepens those people's connection to the church and actually encourages them to move on. So there's a couple of things you added here I think are absolutely critical. In fact, we'll get to that journey from the kitchen back to the neighborhood. I think that actually is a very intentional add as well. So you mentioned it already, but okay, so we have the four sort of, key environments to move folks to. And I love the circular movement idea of that. But you kind of alluded, hey, the key is, how do we get from A to B? How do we get from B to C? That involves easy, obvious, and strategic next steps. So give us a quick walkthrough of moving someone from complete stranger, sees Journey Church out in the community doing something, gets them curious. How do they move towards you?
Well, that's $1 million question. So what we ask ourselves with each of these sections is, okay, what's the most important role we can play to help somebody move in that direction? So neighborhood to foyer. The answer to that question for us is build trust. So every step we create along the way is designed to build or deepen trust. And I'll just mention one of them. One of our 4 steps that we use is social media. Well, social media is used a lot of different ways by a lot of different churches, but this narrowed the focus for us because we said, no. Our social media is not going to announce the next event happening at our church or, just whatever about Sunday morning service was amazing. Everything about our social media has to build trust with someone. It has to reinforce the idea that we have hopefully communicated through our neighborhood events, because we brand everything 4. So through our 4 events, our social media has got to reinforce what they've seen or heard about us to help them begin to see the messaging is consistent and the actions line up with what they're saying. So, you can have whatever steps you want to have, but they've all got to be building trust or the person's never going to walk in and check out a service to begin with.
Okay, so that's how you applied that strategic lens of building trust to social media. So that gives your social media a very targeted, you've decided that it's an outward facing audience. We want it strategic. What's the most important thing to them? It's to build trust. So the filter we're going to apply to our social media is, how does what we're posting build trust? Is that correct?
That is correct. And that clarity makes everything easier for everyone. And it simplifies a lot of decision making.
Yeah, I can imagine, because if you had 2 different people who were both good at social media on your staff, but they had competing priorities, this strategy makes clear what the tiebreakers are.
Same with online video, same with online services and things. And we won't go into it, but it clarified for us exactly what we wanted to create on the digital side, because it was outward facing, designed to build trust. It was not primarily just to keep people connected who missed a Sunday because they were at a soccer tournament.
Gotcha. All right. So now they visited. They've moved along enough lily pads, and now they've come to the front door. How do we move them from foyer to living room?
Yeah. So from the moment they walk in, our next goal is to be a guide for them. We want this church to feel like their church. We want to feel like home. So we want the pronoun to change from your church to our church or my church when they're talking about us, right? So
Right.
because of that, from the minute they walk in, our steps are all designed to just walk alongside them because, as we all know, everybody moves at a different pace once they walk in the door.
Right.
Some people aren't going to want us to even know they're here for 6 months. Other people, they're immediately ready to figure it out. So we designed some steps that created flexibility for them, that put the steering wheel in their hands in terms of letting us know when they were here. But it was obvious, it had to be easy and obvious to them. We are here to be a guide, and this is the step you take when you're ready. So, for instance, the second step is a thing we call the What's Next tour. So, during a service, once we know they're there, they get an invite. You know, a new guest, we know they showed up. They get an invite during a service to have a behind the scenes tour to see how everything works, and then to have a lunch with me afterwards. It's a simple thing, but it's amazing how much eagerness there is to do that, because at lunch they get to ask me all the questions they want to ask me. They feel like I'm accessible. It builds a relationship. And the goal is not to get them to jump into serving or jump into anything else. It is simply like a first date. You come learn more about who we are. We want to learn more about who you are. And then from there, we're clear about, if you're interested, here's your next step. So that is all just us walking alongside somebody, answering their questions when they want them answered, and pointing the way when they're ready to take another step.
Okay, that's awesome. So, and we're going to come back later when we talk about how you measure success about this. I want to talk a little bit about how some of these may have evolved.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of, hey, there's pieces of this, because I think what's important for people to hear and understand is how much of this model you are constantly tweaking and changing, including these intermediate steps. Like, those are things you're always trying to dial in. So we'll come back. So you've been a great guy. They've come to What's Next. They've said, hey, I'm actually interested in volunteering. And now they're on a volunteer team, or they're in a living room environment. What does it look like for you to encourage them to join a small group or to get involved in the spiritual formation strategy of your church?
Yes. So the big picture for us to win is to cultivate community. All of these steps between the living room and kitchen are designed to help them build relationships that are going a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper. We could talk all day about groups because we know it's not a simple thing to do. But what we're doing is creating environments that they want to come to because they're going to be helpful from a content standpoint. But our ultimate goal is to put them in environments where they're able to connect and begin to build some of these relationships that eventually lead to them going, oh, I would like to be in a group that meets regularly with those people. You know, I've got 6 names or 8 names or whatever. So one example is we do short-term groups, which a lot of people do. We've actually got our August ones going right now. They start tonight, but they're at the facility. They're coming here to our building. They are going to be around some good content. It's short. It's 3 Wednesday nights in a row. It'll be around good content. That's why they signed up to come. But we're putting them around round tables with table facilitators. And by the end of that, they will know people a little better. Between living room and kitchen, Justin, I think it's really important that the number of people who can say hi to them by name on a Sunday morning is growing. So as long as that's happening and they're starting to get to know some people, that will evolve into a longer term connection into a group. But they need to feel like, man, people here know my name. They know who I am. And I'm starting to get to know some people on a deeper level.
Okay. All right. So I love this next section that you've really thought through, because, you know, I was, before I became a part of the ICN team, I worked in adult ministries here. I've been in groups, and I know from that world, we were constantly talking about how do we create more intentionality in our groups? What do we do? How do we actually develop depth? And that's something that you talk about here. So you added this journey that doesn't just stop at, hey, you're in community, we want to do something. Talk us through that next leg that you guys have really thought through.
Yeah, so I think this is a critical leg for us. We've got a couple of steps right now. As you said, 6 months from now, this will look different because we'll have
Right.
added steps or changed steps. But right now, we've got a couple of steps. Our whole goal is to develop depth between kitchen back to neighborhood. We are trying to equip people to be able to go back to their workplaces, their schools, their neighborhoods, and invest in folks who are far from God and begin the process of taking them through this. And so there are one of the ways we do that is leadership development groups, which we got the idea from North Point. We've modified it. We do a 9-month version. We're starting them in September.
Mhm.
And so we put a group of men or a group of women into a group. We meet once a month. And the goal of that is to drill deeper. So it's beyond, it's not talking about sermon on Sunday. We're reading a book and we are drilling into how this applies, whether it's understanding how to read the Bible and pray better, or it's how to invest in somebody who's far from God and talk about your faith, whether it's perspective in general on theologically on, okay, here's the new covenant and what Jesus introduced to the world. We're drilling into those kinds of topics in a practical way
Yeah.
and helping develop depth in individuals who then are rising up as leaders for us, one.
Yeah.
So they're small group leaders, they're ministry team leaders, but they're also going back into their workplaces and their neighborhoods. They better understand our mission and they're more engaged and passionate about helping inspire people to follow Jesus.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And like you said, because I've talked to you about some of this, I know that this is probably part of this circle that is the most curious and under development. But I love that you're committed to saying, okay, how do we fully equip these people to become those people that can go out in the world and be that attractive draw to Jesus, and I think that intentionality is going to bear a lot of fruit. So I know what a lot of people want to get to, and what I'm really interested in showing people is how do you measure success in all this? We're going to get there. But before we do, can you just take a moment and say, okay, this is it. This is your strategy. It's clear. It's relational. It has movement. There's lots of great things about this. How do you make sure this is handed off to your staff and your volunteers? Like, what does it look like to push this down in the organization?
That's a great question. So we use this, and when we talk about the metrics, you'll see an entire dashboard. We use this with our staff once a month. We all look at it as a staff and discuss where we are and how we're doing. We also use it with our board. So every month when I meet with the board, this is something we're looking at to measure our church health. And then with our church, one of the things that I found really interesting, we do a celebration night once a year where we bring all our core folks, anybody who's engaged with our church, in, and we share everything. We do it in January. We share everything that God did in the previous year. It's just a big night to celebrate wins, share some things I can't share with them otherwise in other settings. But I actually use this strategy, Justin, to celebrate the wins. So every year I teach what we're trying to do and how all the steps are interconnected. And then I'm sharing wins along the way as we do it. And our core has embraced this because it's simple to understand. It's simple to remember. They have embraced this, and it has provided clarity for them on when they meet somebody or they bring a friend. They know no matter where they are in the journey, in the circle, they know the next step to encourage them to take. I think that clarity has helped with growth and involvement engagement quite a bit.
No doubt. No doubt. And I would say, I think going back to, that's what I felt like has been North Point's strengths, is that clarity pushed all the way down to the volunteer level and the attender level. So I'm not sure anybody listened to the last 3 minutes of what we were saying, because this dashboard popped up that looks like we're getting ready to launch, the space shuttle. So this, for people who are maybe not the data people, they might have just dropped off the call, but this is actually super helpful and really important, because not only have you thought about all the steps, but you've thought about how to measure everything. And this is representative of tons of evolving, like there's different things on here than you had at the beginning and all of that. But talk us through, what are we looking at here? What is all this?
So we knew we had to figure out a way to measure this to know if we're doing well, because you can't trust your gut and you can't just trust stories. We all tend to be too optimistic. So what we did is we identified a primary metric, Justin, that if we didn't have any other metrics, this is the one that best helps us measure success at each stage of the process, right? At each part of the process. So So what we did, there comes my light back. So what we did is we identified that, and we obviously have a lot of secondary metrics, but we identified this, as you see, for every single step along the way. And then we set benchmarks for them. And those benchmarks, they'll be different for every church. This is a mock dashboard. It's not exactly ours, but it's a mock one. So you set a benchmark for each one, and then you just color code them red, yellow, or green. So part of the beauty with our staff and our board is you can glance at this dashboard and in 30 seconds know how healthy we are, how well we're doing, whether we're winning, and you can see where the breakdowns are that need to be addressed. So if something starts trending from green to yellow, we can catch it quickly versus waiting to the end of the year. It also provides a whole lot of accountability for the staff, which I love. I think that's an important piece of it. And it brings alignment to our staff. It brings alignment to our whole church, but especially our staff, because this makes it obvious that, hey, I may be responsible for neighborhood to Foyer stuff, but man, if some of this other stuff isn't happening, I'm going to eventually start struggling. Or I'm responsible for living room to kitchen, but if they're not bringing in enough new guests and those things are all yellow on the right, I can't get green on the left. So that's how we use it from a 30,000 foot view.
Okay, so take us around the circle and give us a really quick, why this box, what does it tell you, and go on to the next one. Hit them all real quick. And in the questions, people can maybe dive in and say, tell us more about this or that, but give us a quick roll around the horn here.
Okay, so neighborhood to Foyer, the metric is we want the number of first-time guests in 2023 to equal our average adult attendance, because we know that metric is going to guarantee growth. What that does real quick is that forces our digital people, our community event people, our missions people, whatever you want to call it, all of those people who are responsible for those steps, they can't feel great about what they're doing unless it's driving people into the building. The Foyer one is obvious. It's, average attendance versus the previous year. Between Foyer and living room, this one's changed quite a bit, and it may change again. This is a metric we're testing right now. We are looking at number of first-time guests in a rolling 12-month period that we are able to convert into volunteering. In other words, how many of them get to the living room and engage? So that's what we're measuring there. Under living room, we're measuring unique monthly volunteers who serve compared to average adult attendance. Now, This is another one that changed. So for years, we measured the average number of volunteers who serve each week compared to adult attendance. But I wanted to shift it to unique monthly volunteers because I wanted to see let's say we've got 300 volunteers. How many of them are not engaged? Because if you have 100 of them who don't serve in a month, that's a problem. But you might never know if you're averaging 200 volunteers serving every week. You'd be like, oh, that's awesome, because not everybody serves every week. So that's why we changed that. Between living room and kitchen, we are measuring the number of unique adults who participate in some type of group environment over the course of the calendar year. So we're just looking how many of them put their foot in the water and get a taste of groups and start building relationships, comparing that versus average adult attendance. The kitchen is just how many small group participants versus average adult attendance. And then from kitchen to neighborhood, the depth side of this circle, we are measuring right now how many adults are engaged in 2 of the 3 trackable habits. So invite, serve, give, connect. For us, you can't measure invite easily, but you can measure serve, give, and connect. So right now we're measuring how many of our adults are engaged in 2 of 3 versus our average adult attendance.
Okay. All right. So that makes sense. Give me the 2 middle ones. What do they tell you?
Yeah. So we added these middle ones because we felt like we needed something to measure how we're doing as staff. So first of all, we did the metric of staff to attendee ratio, and we set a benchmark for ourselves. Like Tony Morgan says, if you're at 1 to 70 or above, you're healthy. We set ours a little bit higher because we like to run leaner. One of the things that it does for me though, Justin, as the LP, when I hire somebody, I know that number is going to go down.
Right.
But in 12 months, if that number hasn't bounced back, then I better pay attention. I either put somebody in the wrong seat, or hired the wrong position or hired the wrong person, but I got to dig into it, right? And then
Right.
the other one is budget, or giving. I want to know, where is our cash flow, because the reality is it's going to take great leadership and it's going to take cash in order to make all of this run on our side. So we're watching those two things.
Okay. So I'm curious, how does this guide, how do these over time, how do these different gauges guide your decision making as a leader in a leadership team? Because I'm looking at this, and I know you said it's a mock dashboard, but if I'm your groups person, I am definitely getting my resume ready at this point, because I'm missing my benchmark pretty severely. So like, how do you look at this? First of all, how do you protect it from being something like that the person who's responsible is like, oh man, another red box meeting, like I don't know how many more of these I can take. But how do you also know, are we doing the right thing, or do we have the right person in the right role? Like, how does this actually inform your decision making as a team and as a leader?
That's a great question. So here's the way I do it. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but here's how I do it. When something starts going south from green to yellow, yellow to red, first thing I'm going to do is look at our steps and see if they're being effective or not. So I'm looking at steps and strategy. Okay. I'm going to assume that we have a systems problem. That's where I always begin. Then if we dig into it, and we realize that's a problem, we'll change it. If we don't think that's a problem, it's not a systems problem, it's not a strategy problem, we don't need to revamp steps.
Mhm.
Okay, at that point, I've got to look at the person who's over that and go, are they contributing to this?
Okay.
Is it they're not working hard enough, or they're not passionate about it, or it's outgrown them? Because that happens, right?
Right.
It grew to the point that it outgrew their skill set. Now I need them in a different seat on the bus. So that is the way we do it. Now, I think you've got to have a really healthy staff for this to be easy on you, because as you said,
Yeah.
if it's red, they start dreading that, right? Now, I love
Right.
that accountability. What I've done with our team is say, here's our mentality. When something's going the wrong direction, we're all pitching in to help get it green again. And that lends itself to a team atmosphere where there's not a lot of finger pointing. And in most cases, it's a strategy, system, steps deal. It's not the person. When
Right.
it is the person, you got to address it.
Yeah. And I think what you said there, to me, when you said it, I thought, that is absolutely key, is a system like this to run effectively, meaning you're not going to try to sandbag this or mess with the numbers. It's because there's health. Like,
Yep.
if there's health and I know, hey, I don't have to fear. This is just a way to be completely honest and transparent about what's going on. And I think everyone listening to this has probably been in a situation where they were leading and they felt like something wasn't working, but every single week the person over that thing was talking about a new story of life change and some other anecdote, which is all true, but it was masking like some larger issue that was going on. And what I like about your system is that it gives you a window to say, it's not that good things aren't happening, but they're not happening at the level we need them to happen in order for this entire system to work. So, all right. So I have one more question that I want to give you before we kick it to their questions, which have started to build up, which is great. But before I do that, I want to give you guys an opportunity to think about two things. One is, what you can see in this conversation is what, in my mind, and I guess I'm really biased because I'm a part of it, but it's what I think makes the Irresistible Church Network great. It isn't about copying one style of ministry. It's about a group of churches and a group of really smart and gifted leaders like Matt and his staff working together to try to figure out, how do we make all churches more effective at reaching their unchurched neighbors and friends. And there's a group of those leaders that have decided to form a community together and share these ideas. And this is awesome, because the reason we debuted this model in a webinar is because Matt told us, hey guys, I've got these ideas. I don't know if these would help other churches, but here you go. And so we've got this generous group of leaders that are in community. If you're listening to this and going, how do I get in circles with leaders like Matt? I would encourage you to get interested and ask about the Irresistible Church Network. Louis is in the Q&A. You just email us, let us know, let Louis know. It's a great group of leaders. We love facilitating ideas like this and helping make churches better. So if that's something that you're interested in, move towards that. One other thing that we thought was, when we started unpacking this idea, we knew there's going to be some people that are like, oh man, our church needs this, but this is not my fastball. And I would love to process this with other people that think this way. So we actually asked Matt, hey, would you be willing to facilitate a cohort of leaders to walk them through this, where you could talk them through their version of this, and maybe if they had questions for you. So if you're looking to borrow the brain of someone who thinks like this, and that would totally help our church get clarity. And like, I think if you could get clarity around your version of this, it would be the greatest gift you could give your staff and your church. So there's a 3-session workshop. It is limited to 10 slots. We wanted to keep it small so that we could actually work out strategies together. Matt's going to facilitate it. Thank you, Matt, for your willingness to do that. If you're interested in doing that, 3 months, once a month, again, email Louis, let him know. Only 10 slots. So we did want to keep it limited, but $99 to participate. So if you're like, I'm looking for a workshop, great opportunity. So final question before we get to their questions is, okay, so I'm listening to this and I'm looking at what you built and thinking, oh my goodness, that is a ton of work. And it is. You took years to refine that. And I'm looking for a very first step. What is the very first step? What is something every leader on this call could hang up and do tomorrow that would help move them towards this?
Great question. I'm going to give you 2 steps. Before I do, let me just zoom out again to 30,000 feet, because the stereotype on the outside of North Point is it's evangelistic, attractional, and that is it. But that's never been the case. And the thing about this strategy is it is both evangelism and discipleship. It is both deep and wide, as Andy wrote the book. It literally is. And so to me, this is comprehensive, and it's one of the few comprehensive models or strategies of ministry. So the thing I would encourage you to do is, number one, read Deep and Wide and read 7 Practices of Effective Ministry by Andy. Read both of those with your board, with your leadership team, with your staff, depending on the size of your church, and discuss them together. Because all of these ideas are going to bubble up as you read those 2 books. And then secondly, once you read those, I would sit down with that same group of people and I would watch this webinar. It's going to be available. Just watch it together and then start a healthy review or reimagination of whatever strategy you have. You have one. If you don't know what it is, well, you'll discover it. You've got one, but you need an intentional one. So start looking at what you have and then reimagining what it could look like and what it should look like. Because I think that conversation, Justin, as you said, there's nothing more powerful than clarity. And I think that conversation will lead to something life-changing for people in your community when you get clear on how you're trying to help people follow Jesus.
Okay, those are 2 great tips. Everybody can do that. Let's get to some of the questions here that came in. Okay, the first one I have is, does your org chart align to the strategy, or do folks have and roles where they're responsible for foyer and kitchen? Like, how does your org chart overlay with that movement? And are people responsible for parts of that movement, it sounds like? And do they have like multi roles?
Yeah, that's something we'll dive into more in the workshop for sure. But yes, in our case, we keep our staff lean. So some people do carry multiple roles, but every person on our staff can point to the section of the strategy that they own and they're responsible for. And I think it's that clarity and accountability that's key.
Okay, what about digital? Where does this fall in the strategy? My assumption in this question is they're probably talking about online, but it might be more than that. The question is, where does digital fall in the strategy, or does it? Question mark.
Well, it's a great question. And the answer is, it's contextualized to what you want to do with it. For us, digital falls in neighborhood to Foyer, and we use it largely for those purposes. But you may have a digital strategy where it falls in developing disciples and it's living room to kitchen or kitchen to neighborhood. That's something in a workshop we can work through, but it's contextualized of what you want it to be.
Okay, what about communicating this to the congregation? Do you ever do that? If so, what does that look like?
I don't ever do it on a Sunday to the entire congregation. I mean, the average person that just attends our church could not draw this circle out and explain it. We only communicate the next steps that are easy, obvious, and strategic for them to take. But when you talk about our core folks, as I mentioned earlier, people who volunteer here, who give here, who are engaged with groups, we're talking about this with them every single year.
Okay, and you also mentioned this annual event you do for the volunteers. When you talk a little bit, just briefly about how you emphasize this model in that celebration of volunteers.
Yeah. The fun piece is not my specialty, first of all. So we have other people who bring all the fun to that event. And then they give me the microphone and roll the TV out and say, okay, now you can do the vision stuff. So I literally, just like we built this out, Justin, in our slides, we'll put the circle up and I will teach through it and remind them of the 4 environments and the win for each one. And then we'll show steps from neighborhood to Foyer, and I'll remind them all these steps are connected. Here's how you can use them to build trust with your friend to get them to come. And then I'll share some wins based on, that we saw from those steps. I'll share a metric probably that, hey guys, we grew this much in this area and we all celebrate that. I do that all the way around the circle so that all of the stories, I want all of the stories and I want all of the numbers to be contextualized in, oh, all these pieces fit together. And look what God did when we each did our little part. That's what I want them to see and understand.
Gotcha. All right. This next person has a question about the what's next environment you mentioned. Are the tours that you mentioned, are they one-on-one or are they done as groups of new people? How does that work?
That's a great question. And I'm not directly involved with that. I know we keep them small, and I think they're typically no more. The largest we'll do is maybe 14 or 16 people. But if it's only 4 people or 2 people, we're okay with that. But that way it's a little more intimate setting. They can ask more questions and I can get to know them on a first name basis.
Is that every week or is that like wait till we have critical mass kind of thing?
Right now, the way we do it is we say it's the 3rd Sunday of every month. So it's something 2 Sundays out of the month. I know I'm promoting it as the next step for people.
Okay. All right. So this person asks, what are some examples of being in the neighborhood and the frequencies of those examples? For example, the concert in the park.
Yep.
What is your current neighborhood engagement look like?
So we try to do 3 what we would call keystone events every year, connecting with the neighborhood. This year we did a father-daughter dance for the entire community, which was a massive hit. We're doing a conference for all the nonprofit organizations in our community. We're doing a leadership conference for them, footing the entire bill, hosting the entire thing. We are going to do a mother-son event this year. Sometimes we've done Halloween things, and anytime we can, we partner with the city or we partner with another organization, because it's even better if we can do that, and we try to make the event better. And then the last thing we do, Justin, which we don't call it Be Rich, but North Point has Be Rich. We do our own version of that, where do a massive offering at the end of the year, big serve push. Last year we gave $125,000 away to nonprofit organizations and to families in need in our community. So all those kinds of things people see. And to just real quick, to tie this in with like social. So one of the things we don't want to do is come across as, hey, we're telling you all the good stuff that we're doing, so you'll like us. So instead of that, when we give all this money away, we shoot a video of us handing these checks out to all these nonprofits, and then our social media person makes a post about how we're for these organizations and how amazing these organizations are and what they do in the community. We just make them the heroes. When we do a father-son deal, we promote it, but we make the dads, or father-daughter, we make the dads and the daughters the hero. That feels much better, and it fits us much better than saying, hey, look at us and all the good stuff we do. But it builds trust nonetheless.
Yeah. So are those big tent poles of events you mentioned? Are there some that stick in the rotation for a couple of years? Do you swap them out and try new things? Like, how often does those 3 tent pole events get swapped out for something to try something new?
No, we'll do it over a period of years, until we feel like, you know what, there's something better to accomplish that.
Yeah.
So for instance, next year we'll do another father-daughter dance. Now we're going to move when we do it, but in terms of the time of year, but we'll do another one. If we see something that works real well, it's all about, is this adding value to them? And do they love the fact that we're doing it? And as long as that's the case, we're going to do it until we find a better solution.
All right. This person would love you to define building trust at the neighborhood environment level with greater detail. They'd like some examples. What does it look like? What does it not look like?
Yep. Well,
Talk
I'm
through
gonna
building
give you a
trust.
personal one, okay?
Okay.
So, I had a cousin. I wasn't close to her, but a cousin, first Saturday of June, who took her own life. She's 48 years old. She's married and had 3 boys, elementary, middle school, and a high school boy. And I got the call that morning to get over to the house. So I went over there. Long story short, they'd only been to our church 2 times. Okay. They'd only lived here about 3 years and not believers. They don't know they're from Connecticut. They don't know the first thing about any of this. So when it comes to building trust, Jay is the husband, the dad. And so obviously I walked with him through all that. Right. But on the other side of that, what we have done is tried to make sure that through our actions and through these steps that we're building enough trust with this family that they know it's not a bait and switch when they come in, that I'm going to be accepted when I show up, that it's not that you can belong before you believe. We're trying to make sure they feel comfortable coming in and that they'll be accepted just the way they are. And so this is a personal example. You don't scale this, but one of the things we discovered, Jay doesn't have a clue how to cook. I wouldn't either. I'd be lost, right? So it's three boys and Jay who don't know. I mean, he's got to figure out how to cook. So people in our church who he does not know rallied around and gave him, I don't know, $700-800 worth of restaurant gift cards and then provided meals for 2 weeks. Well, he shows up, Justin, 2 Sundays ago, and this guy didn't know any better. It's the 3rd song before the message. And he marches. I see some guy in the corner of my eye marching straight up the aisle. He comes straight up to me, gives me a big hug in the middle. Is like, man, the food's been amazing. Thank you. I couldn't believe he was there. Turned around, showed back up.
That's cool.
Showed back up on Sunday. So that's a microcosm of it. But that is the kind of trust we're trying to build so that they feel like, man, I cannot believe these people love me and are for me this much. I should probably go over there. It's a safe place to go.
Do you ever, like, for example, at the what's next or when you're interacting, they're there to ask you questions, but do you ever do any kind of reverse engineering of finding out, hey, how did you find us and what was it? And what do you learn from that? Is that part of that dialogue as well?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you in short, what we've learned is what's helped build those steps from neighborhood to Foyer. The short version, Justin, is that we want people to see us doing good in the community, being for them, no strings attached. We built this facility with the use of the community in mind. So this serves as a meeting space for our community. So this gets them in the building. Chamber holds their annual dinner here. There are all kinds of community events in our building, which allows them to get familiar, builds a little bit of trust. We try to serve them well at those events. Our social media then, when they see or hear what we're doing in the community, it piques their curiosity enough. Or maybe somebody at our church has shared one of our posts and they saw it, but they start stalking us on Facebook and they stalk our website. We create a special digital experience every week with the outsider in mind. So they start watching. It's like 12 minutes long, but they start watching that, checking us out. This often goes on for months, right? But the whole time there's a friend who comes here who's investing and inviting in them. And so what we have found, because of the steps and the way they're all connected for us, by the time they come here, they feel like they know us. And they often, it's pretty comical, but they feel like they know me because they've been watching so long. And they're walking in now. We actually have had some of them use the verbiage. I showed up today just to verify everything I've been seeing online is true of y'all. So it is building a relationship before they ever walk in the door.
That's awesome. Well, I know you and I are both passionate about this. I actually believe clarity is king in any organization. I'd love to see the church become more clear. I think about the difference that would have made it in churches I grew up in, churches I worked at. I've seen the value of it. You've seen the value of it. So we're obviously passionate about this, but I really do believe this is critical and to healthy churches, and it will help them grow. It'll help their staff. It'll reduce frustration. So obviously we're convinced about it and we believe strongly in it. So again, if you would like to, if you're somebody who is like, it's not that I don't agree, it's just this isn't how my mind is wired, it's not my strength. But if I had somebody like Matt on my team, that would help. We have that opportunity with the cohort. But what we want you to know is that both Matt and I, first of all, thank you, Matt, for being so generous with the things you're thinking about and offering them to the network and to churches at large. And thanks so much for all of you that have been on this call today. I know you're super busy. You probably have a gazillion things going on, and you took time out of your day to come join us and kind of hear it. And we'd love to meet you. We'd love to get to know you and see if we could help you in any other way. Thanks for all that you're doing. We know that the work of the local church is the most important work going on in the world today, and it's not as easy as it has been for sure. And so we are super appreciative of you. So thank you so much on behalf of Matt and myself, and we'll see you next time on a webinar. Thank you.